I'm Steve Perry. This is Biblical Anarchy. And a while back, we did a video by Maiz. Today, we're going to be taking a look at another one of his. Now, in the past video I looked at, I agreed with a lot of what he was saying and with the conclusion that he was coming to. On this one, I don't. Because he gets pretty much everything wrong, okay? We're going to go through and show where he gets the things wrong. But it's still a valuable video because it shows how we can allow our personal point of view to impact what we think the Bible actually says when it doesn't actually say that. So let's go ahead and watch his video, and I will weigh in along the way when necessary. Here it goes.
Of abortion, you can understand why atheists could fall into the category of pro-choice, pro-abortion, or pro-life, anti-abortion.
And there we go, right out the gate. This is a misrepresentation of the two sides. Pro-life is not pro or anti-abortion, and pro-choice is not pro-abortion. Recently, in the state of Florida, one of the state legislators who was involved in getting the 6-week ban on abortion had to get an abortion herself. She's pro-life, yet she got an abortion. I'm pro-choice, and I think it's sad and unfortunate that she had to get an abortion. What pro-life and pro-choice really means is that the pro-choice position is that the choice should be left in the hands of the mother and the healthcare provider. Now, different people will draw a line. Some will say in the first trimester, the first 2 trimesters, whatever. They'll draw the line in different places, but that's generally pro-choice says the mother and the healthcare provider should be responsible for making the choice, whereas pro-life believes that the government should severely limit when and where the choice can be made. The Catholic Church is in fact anti-abortion, and they are in fact pro-life. But most people who are pro-life do support abortions in some cases, namely to save the life of the mother. Sometimes in the case of rape or incest, they support abortion rights. They're not anti-abortion. They are anti-abortion in many cases, but they're not completely anti-abortion. And people who are pro-choice often want the exact same thing when it comes to abortions. They just think that the choice should be left in the hands of the women, and here's why. Because I am pro-choice, let me explain. I am pro-choice because I believe the person making the choice is responsible for the outcome of the choice. And like it or not, when we have these abortion bans in states, there are women who need an abortion who wind up being unable to get one. And sometimes they suffer long-term health consequences because of this, and sometimes they die because of this. That, to me, if I support that legislation, then the outcome of that choice is on me. Whereas if I leave that choice in the hands of the mother, sometimes women are going to get abortions that I don't agree with. It will happen. But the responsibility for the outcome of that choice is on them, not me. That's why I'm pro-choice.
Because it would be based on personal preference, worldview, from a subjective point of view. One atheist could justify from a subjective point of view that they, as a humanist or a pragmatist or for whatever reason, could say that abortion is really, really bad, and an atheist who does not hold those views could, from personal preference, say, yeah, the woman's right to choose to kill the baby is totally justified, and there's no objective moral standard they hold to which could contradict them. What is quite ridiculous is when somebody who is claiming to be beholden to a Judeo-Christian worldview, or in the case of specifically Jews, not a Judeo-Christian but a Judaic worldview, based in the Hebrew Bible, it's quite absurd for somebody from that background to make the claim that abortion is okay in any capacity.
Again, Catholics rule out all abortions. You can get life-saving health care for the mother, but you can't intentionally abort the fetus even to save the life of the mother, as I understand the Catholic view. That's rare. Right, that's Catholic only, and most of the Catholics I know don't actually hold to that point of view. It's just that's the point of view of the church. But again, we have a misrepresentation here because the Judaic worldview isn't based strictly on the Hebrew Bible, and at least with Catholicism, their worldview is not based strictly on the Christian Bible, the Old and New Testament, right? So To say that you can't have this view based on the Hebrew Bible, that's not where Jews get all of their, hey, it's valuable to them, but just like the Catholic Church. So the Jews have what they believe to be the oral teachings of Moses or the oral Torah, and the Catholic Church has what they believe to be the oral teachings of the disciples or church tradition. And they have these and they hold these on par with the sacred writings, with the Hebrew Bible for the Jews or with the Old and New Testament for the Christians. And so, for example, in the Catholics have a book called the Didache, which is the teachings of the 12. And so they are authoritative on par with the Bible, and they say you can't get an abortion, right? So they don't need to find it anywhere else in the Bible. And we're going to see this later in the video. The Catholics don't try to find it here because it's not here to be found. And so they don't try to find it here because they don't need to. They have it in the Didache. It doesn't have to come from the Bible for them. So this video is coming more from like a Protestant angle where they feel the need to read this into the Bible, and then that will justify their views on abortion. But really, their views on abortion just aren't based on the Bible. They're not.
And that is something that we see now in the modern Orthodox Jewish community, infecting the ultra-Orthodox community in some places as well, that there is this myth that is being perpetuated that abortion is totally okay biblically. Not only that, modern Orthodox Jews who hold a pro-abortion stance are some of the most extreme in leniency of until when the abortion can be done, including up until the time of the actual birth itself in some cases.
Let's set aside political stuff here and let's just talk culturally here for a minute. Because years ago, you used to have people come by your house and sell you stuff, vacuum cleaners, water purification systems, whatever. And when they would come, you'd be like, well, how much is this vacuum cleaner? They'd be like, oh, it's $2,000. You're like, well, I can't afford that. And he said, but if you get it today, I can sell it to you for $600. And he said, well, give me a couple days to think about it. No, you got to get it today, right? That's a high pressure sales technique. It's known to be a high pressure. You have a limited amount of time to make this decision because that favors the sale, right? If you have 2-3 days to think about it, you might not buy the vacuum. Whereas if you have to make the decision today. So when we place a ban on abortion after 6 weeks and a woman misses her period, and she's scared. She doesn't want to be pregnant. She waits a couple days. She gets a strip, one of those strips from the gas station, from the pharmacy. She pees on it. She's pregnant, right? So she sets up a doctor's appointment. She goes to the doctor. And by the time she's at the doctor, he does the exam and says, hey, you're 4.5 weeks pregnant. She goes, ooh, I don't want a baby. I might need an abortion. So he said, well, I could set you one up for Monday. She said, well, give me a couple days to think about it. But if she's 4.5 weeks pregnant and there's a 6-week window, she doesn't have a couple days to think about it. She's got to set up that abortion today. Like, this is literally high pressured sales techniques that were used back in the day by door-to-door salesmen, now suddenly being applied to abortion. But I don't want that woman to rush and get an abortion. I want her to be able to have the opportunity to look at other options that she can have, right? Could she put the baby up for adoption? Maybe she can get some counseling and some therapy and some support to have the baby herself and give it a good home, right? I want her to be able to have all these options available to her. I don't want her to just rush and make the decision to get an abortion. So yes, I believe in pushing that date further and further down the line because realistically, and I've made this challenge before, I'll make it on this video. You can leave it in the comments. If you know any woman who said, I don't want to have this baby, but I do want the stretch marks, I want the morning sickness, I want the weight gain, I want all the things it does to my body, but I don't want to have the baby, so I'm going to wait 8-9 months to get an abortion. If you know this woman, please let me know, because I've never had anybody be able to produce this woman. The fact of the matter is, women are going to get the abortion as soon as possible because not doing so has negative consequences for them. What I would like to do is give them enough time to where they can comfortably look at the alternatives and maybe not get an abortion, because I'm not a fan of abortion. I just want that choice to be available to them if it's necessary. You follow?
So I want to analyze why they think that that's okay. The rabbinical stance of modern Orthodox rabbis that justify it biblically. And I'm going to point out that it's one based on a mistranslation of a certain text in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. And I'm also going to point out rabbis who are much, much earlier who have already clearly stated that that is not the view of Judaism. So rabbis today ruling, if you don't know, in Orthodox Judaism, in Rabbinical Judaism, you would have to rule some kind of interpretation based on earlier rabbinical rulings. You're not allowed to contradict them directly, which is why the Talmud, with so many opinions, you can kind of pick from it in certain cases of what's real and what's not. But in the case of a clear rabbinical ruling from an earlier generation, you would not be able to contradict that as a modern rabbi. That's against rabbinical authority. But even without that point, even just on the biblical standard alone, that would be very clear from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew Bible, from the Torah. Now, I'm going to cover...
So he's saying it's based on a mistranslation done by modern rabbis. I'm going to show you that this translation is very ancient, and it's not just rabbis, it's the church. This is the way that this passage has been interpreted consistently since before the time of Jesus. Okay? The way he's complaining about them interpreting it, calling it a modern rabbinical interpretation, he's just wrong. Rabbis and the church have interpreted it this way, again, going back to before the time of Jesus.
Cover a few things in this video. I'm going to go over the translation of the verse, how it's misused. I'm going to talk about the rabbis that obviously contradict that earlier in history. I'm also going to point out that one of the most prevalent translations for this mistranslation is this edition, translated in part by Jonathan Sacks, and very much in line with his views on it. I'm also going to show a video a little bit later on of Jonathan Sacks mistranslating a word from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew Bible, in a video with Dennis Prager. Quite an absurd, basic mistranslation, what you would call a second-grade error for such a prominent rabbi to make.
I just want to point out, I'm not going to get into that part of the video where he gets into the mistranslation. I think he's taking a very narrow view of translation here. Like, we have a word in Hebrew, we have a word in English, and this is the word we have to use, right? When in fact, when you are translating a passage from one language into another, you're trying to figure out the intent of the passage and then bring that intent into the new language, right? And so the words won't always match one to one. And I think that's what he's doing there with Jonathan Sacks if you go to watch his video, which I'll link down below. That's what he's doing there. He's basically trying to hold a word-to-word translation and go, well, Jonathan Sacks isn't word-to-word. But what Jonathan Sacks is doing is bringing the thought into English, not bringing the word strictly by itself into English. And sometimes you have to do that in translation.
And then I'm also going to play a video of a man talking about being a pro-choice rabbi and how he justifies it. I'm going to show why his logic is completely flawed there as well. So the verse we're referring to is from the book of Exodus. It's a case right after the Ten Commandments are given, so murder's already banned. Keep that context in mind. Moses is given...
Murder's already banned. He says, this is poisoning the well. Yes, murder's already banned. What does that have to do with abortion? You can't say, listen, if the Bible says you can't wear an ugly shirt and you say, Steve, that's an ugly shirt, it's a sin to wear it, right? That's your opinion that the shirt is ugly. The Bible did not rule that my shirt is ugly. When the Bible says you shall not murder, the Bible's not ruling that abortion is murder. You have to show somewhere else in the Bible where the Bible rules that abortion is murder. You can't just say, well, in my opinion, abortion is murder. The Bible says you shall not murder. Therefore, the Bible says you can't get an abortion. That's absurd.
Giving the law to the Jewish people, explaining different types of damages and situations that can occur and the consequences for those things. So it starts off, and I'm going to read from the Hebrew a few words and translate directly from the Hebrew to the English. And I'm going to go and explain that translation and why the modern Orthodox stance on it is completely backwards. So the situation given, roughly, is two men are fighting. One of them strikes a pregnant woman. The baby comes out. In one case, damages are paid. If the baby dies, it's a life for a life. And I'm going to explain the actual translation and then the mistranslation. So it says, V'chi yinatzu anashim, and two men are quarreling, or some men are quarreling. V'nagfu isha hara, and they strike a pregnant woman. V'yatzu yeladeha, that means the child came out. Yeladeha means her child, the product of her birthing. Yeled is the language of a baby, of a child, not a baby per se, but a child. Yiladim, children. It's the same root word. When you talk about abortion, when you talk about miscarriage, you do not use the word the child came out. V'yatzu yiladeha. You would say nafal, the baby fell. Some other terminology like that would be used from a biblical perspective, even from a modern Hebrew perspective. You would not say the baby came out when it's a miscarriage. Oh, look, the baby came out. No, that's not how it's referred to.
Okay, now here he's going to contradict himself. I'm just going to throw this out here because what you have in this passage is you have a phrase followed by two clauses. Okay, so the phrase is the child came out. And the clause is, he's going to translate it differently, but the clause is there's no further injury or there is further injury. These are the two clauses that follow. When you have two clauses followed by a phrase and the verb is in the original phrase, but it's not in the second clause, there's no other verb in the second clause, right? Then this is telling you that this clause is reliant on the verb in the phrase, just like the first clause was. So in other words, if we were to break this all the way down, it would be the children come out, but there is no injury. The children come out, but there is an injury, right? So in the second verse, he's going to argue that it is in fact a miscarriage. But he's arguing that it can't be a miscarriage in the first verse because you wouldn't say the child came out if it's a miscarriage. But again, that's what it's saying in the second verse, he says. That contradicts you on the first verse. Obviously, you can say the child came out in the case of a miscarriage if the second clause is in fact a miscarriage. And I see in the comments we got somebody saying, I am against abortion. That's fine. I'm not arguing for or against abortion. The question is, Exodus 21, is that arguing for or against abortion?
So, v'yatzu yiladeha, the child came out, v'lo yihiyeh ason, and there is no fatality. It could also mean tragedy or disaster, in this case meaning fatality. Obviously, everyone agrees on that.
No, everyone does not agree on that. If you go to Bible Hub and you pull up Exodus 21:22, it's going to give you a list of all the translations. Not a single one of them use fatality. Now, if you look on the shelf behind me, and you can't see it right now because it's blocked by the video, I have the Art Scroll Tanakh. They do go with fatality. That's the only one I was able to find that does. But what is interesting to me, let's throw this up on the screen right now. This is the Douay Rheims. These are the Catholic translations. Okay, this is from Bible Hub. So if men quarrel and one strike a woman with child and she miscarry indeed. So the Catholics who are the most pro-life you're going to find translate this as miscarry. Okay, but live herself. He shall be answerable for so much damage. So, but she lives herself, right? So the Catholic Church is using this Douay Rheims. This is the important one, okay? You're going to see each one of the Catholic translations use miscarriage. As a result, she miscarries, but she herself survives. So they don't use fatality. They use injury or survives. Hurt a pregnant woman so she miscarries but no further injury. Injure a pregnant woman so that she has a miscarriage and yet no further harm follows. But the important one is the Douay Rheims here, because he's arguing that this is a modern translation by the rabbis. Now, the Douay Rheims is a translation into English of the Latin Vulgate. That goes all the way back to Justin. No, not Justin. His name's escaping me at the moment. I can't believe it. But this is a translation of the Vulgate. I mean, this is a 1700, the Vulgate, roughly 1600 and some odd years old. So this is not modern, and it's not the rabbis. I mean, this is a church father, Jerome. This is a church father. This is not the rabbis. So this is nothing new. And a funny thing is, if you go to the original Douay Rheims, which was done in the 1500s, they actually use the word abortion, like to abort instead of miscarry. So no, this is not modern rabbis. This is the church has translated it this way. This translation has been tradition for a long time, and longer than that, as we're going to see.
Anosh yanesh kasher yasit alav ba'al ha'isha v'natan biflilim. The damages should be paid in accordance with the will of the husband and the authorities. So woman is stricken in this conflict. The baby comes out. There's no fatality. The man pays damages.
Okay. Now, in his video, he's going to go with Maimonides. Let's look at Rashi. Okay. This is, here we go. This is what Rashi has to say on the subject. And hurt a woman with child is the first line. We're going to come down to the second one. No further mischief. No mischief with the woman. He shall surely be immersed to pay the value of the offspring to the husband. We estimate her value according to what she is worth if she were sold as a slave in the market, giving a higher value on account of her being with child. So this is, in fact, this is Rashi. Like, this is a couple generations before Maimonides. So this is not modern rabbis saying that this is a miscarriage. This goes way back further than that. Here's Targum Jonathan in Judaism. This is, so the dating on this is all over the map, but it's still old. If men, Exodus 21:22, if men, when striving with a woman, or when striving, strike a woman with child and cause her to miscarry, but not to lose her life, the fine on account of the infant, which the husband of the woman shall lay upon him, he shall pay according to the sentence of the judges. But if death befall her, then thou shalt judge the life of the killer for the life of the woman. So in Judaism, this has been the interpretation of this passage for a long time.
This is the next part. V'ima son yihiyeh, and if there is a fatality, v'natata nefesh tachat nefesh. It is a life for a life, and then it says an eye for an eye, and so on. This is clearly indicating if the woman is stricken, the baby comes out alive, you pay damages for the fact that the baby is injured, probably. The woman is injured, probably. She just had a premature birth because she was struck. You would pay damages for that. And if the baby dies, if there is a fatality, then you have to pay with your life for the murder.
It's so clearly indicating that. Then why is it that in all these Jewish sources and Christian sources, we're going to look at another one now, or another Jewish source now, why is it that this just doesn't compute? Nobody holds this view. This, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be the oldest translation we have. This is the Septuagint. This is a translation of the Hebrew into Greek, which is translated back into English for us. Now, we see something different happening here, but let's take a look at it. It says, and if two men are fighting and they strike a pregnant woman and her child come out unformed, he shall suffer a financial penalty according to whatever the husband of the woman may impose. He shall pay with a judicial assessment. But if her child was formed, he shall pay life for life. So this, in the Septuagint, is distinguishing between the child being formed and unformed, right? So if the child comes out a blob, right, it's early in the pregnancy and it doesn't have fingers and toes, then he just pays a fine. But if it has fingers and toes, he's put to death. So here they're kind of siding with his view on abortion, but they're saying it's a miscarriage in both cases. So this interpretation that he has is actually the modern interpretation, the one that he's presenting here. Looking at the Septuagint, looking at the Targum Jonathan, looking at the Vulgate, looking at the Douay Rheims, like all these translations that are ancient have this as a miscarriage in both verses. And I think for good reason, but I am going to get into a way that we could support his argument. I just don't think it's the winning argument. Oops, let me get him back on the screen before I play the video. Here we go.
Now, they will argue on the modern Orthodox side that no, it means that if the woman had a miscarriage, you pay damages. But if her life is what is taken in the incident, if she dies, then you pay as a life for a life because of murder. Now, this doesn't make sense at all because we already know that murder is not allowed because it was talked about in the Ten Commandments just before this.
But again, if saying that murder is not allowed doesn't weigh in on abortion unless the Bible defines abortion as murder, does it?
Murder is obviously not okay from the Ten Commandments perspective. There's no other reason to be going over this and explaining how other various types of murders are not okay.
What? There's times where I go, did you even read the passage, bro? Let's click back. Let's get the Bible back up. 12, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place for you to flee, right? So it's murder if he lies in wait. It's not if he doesn't. Yeah, once you say murder is against the law, then you kind of have to define which killings are murder and which killings are not murder. And that's what's happening here in Exodus 21. We get down here, when a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. That's murder, right? But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. Now listen, this is insensitive language talking about the slaves. I get that, but this is in the Bible. This is what we're discussing. And these are the verses that lead right up to this. And remember what Rashi said. Rashi said this is about slave prices. That makes sense why it would immediately follow the passage about the slave, right? It's another issue of the slave and what is murder and what is not. Is striking a pregnant woman murder, right? We get down here, an ox gores a man. That obviously wouldn't be murder except for verse 29. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past and its owner has been warned but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned and its owner shall be put to death. So yes, over and over, we're having to get to the point, the discussion, since murder has been outlawed, we have to describe what types of killings are murder and what types are not, which leads us to Jeremiah. Let me get this up on the screen. Here we go. Sorry, it's blocking my beautiful face, but you're going to have to find a way to get through it. This is from Richard Elliott Friedman is one of the scholars involved in this book. I forget the name of the other scholar. But this is talking about in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is speaking directly about an abortion, saying basically that he wished he had been killed in the womb, right? And they say the second way in which Jeremiah's wish may shed light on this matter is in regard to the relevance of the commandment about murder that we discussed above. The question there had to do with murder, Hebrew root, and I've got this small on my screen, RSH, I believe it is, versus killing, the root being MWT. Jeremiah is the one person in the Hebrew Bible to explicitly talk about abortion, and when he talks about abortion, he uses the MWT root. This is the word that is not used in the Ten Commandments. In fact, this verse never means murder in the Bible. It is used for David's killing Goliath in battle. It is used by an Amalekite who claims to David that he killed King Saul at the king's own request. In a psalm, it refers to the just killing of the wicked. Only in one psalm does it refer to the ill-willed taking of life, and the nature of the act of killing is not identified in that poem. This is to say, the word that Jeremiah uses for abortion, the only word used in connection with abortion in the Bible, always refers to killing and never to murder. Conversely, the word that is used in the Ten Commandments is the Hebrew root, which specifically means murder. The implication of this are serious. It means that the Ten Commandments cannot correctly be cited in support of present-day anti-abortion positions. So what he's trying to do, like I said, is poison the well here. He's trying to get this into your thought, like, don't you agree abortion is murder? And the Bible said you shall not murder. The problem is that the Bible never sets abortion up as murder, and the one place where it talks about it and has the opportunity to do so, it uses a different word that doesn't mean murder. It just means killing. Now, you could argue, and you could say, well, it still could be, just like we might say somebody killed somebody else today and mean murder. Maybe that's how Jeremiah intended it. You could argue that. But you need him to explicitly say it in order to say that the Bible condemns abortion as murder. It just doesn't. He goes on.
This is obviously referencing that even the child in the womb has the same status as a living, outside the womb, fully developed person. They are exactly the same.
And therein lies the problem. He's coming from his own belief, which is an honorable belief, an admirable belief. I believe, like he does, that all humans have a certain value. And then he's claiming that value gets assigned at conception, right? But the problem is, again, if we back up to the previous verse with the rough language, the slave is his money, right? If we back up to that previous verse, This isn't assigning the same value to a slave. Earlier in the chapter, if you beat a free Israelite to death, there's no time limit that he has to die within in order for you to be avenged. But in this particular case, if it's a slave, he has to die within 2 days, or the assumption is you didn't intentionally kill him because the slave is your money, right? There is no one set value for human life here in Exodus 21. Different lives have different values. And that's why the question has to be answered. In this case specifically, what if it is the fetus of a pregnant woman that I kill? Is that murder? And it doesn't appear to be, but he's desperately trying to make it so.
So if you kill that baby in the womb, you are guilty of murder. Now, I'm going to play a video a little bit later on.
Now, we're not going to get into that video. Let me go ahead and get him off the screen here. What he's going to do is he's going to make the claim that he's steel manning the argument, saying, okay, we'll accept the term miscarriage. But he's actually straw manning the argument, okay? This is a big problem with what he does throughout this passage. To steel man an argument is to make it stronger, so he's saying he's steel manning it by translating it if she miscarries, but he's saying there's still a fine, therefore something wrong still happened, right? Well, yes. So then he's saying this rabbi that says, well, what's the punishment for? He's way off the rails. Understand what's happening there. The pro-choice position doesn't mean that men should have the choice to go around beating up pregnant women until they have a miscarriage. That's not the pro-choice position. See, this passage isn't directly discussing an abortion. It's discussing a fight between two men where a pregnant woman gets involved and she gets hit somehow and she loses the baby. Of course, that's a crime. You hit a pregnant woman, causing her to lose her baby. But it's not a woman going to a doctor saying, hey, I would like an abortion. The doctor provides the abortion, and then the doctor gets fined. That's what he would need to do to make this a thing about abortion. Now, as I pointed out, I'm going to show you a way to make a better argument than the one that he's making using the passage at hand. So, let me get this back up on the screen. I got it on yours, but I don't have it on mine. Here we go. When men strive and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, and the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Now hold on, life for life. If we scroll back up here, where whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death, but if he did not lie in wait for him, and God led him to fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. So the question is, when we get to this verse down here, where it says life for life, are we talking about the woman, or are we talking about the fetus? Now, what we know is that these men were, maybe one was lying in wait for the other, but they didn't appear to be lying in wait for the woman. They certainly weren't lying in wait for the fetus. You just can't make that argument. So these men start fighting. The woman jumps in. Now, it's possible that he hits the woman, injures her, and then continues to beat her, which would probably fall under lying in wait, and then he would have to pay with his life if he beat her to death. But you can't make the argument that he's lying in wait for the fetus. Like, how would you even go about that? This isn't a reasonable interpretation. But if you want to make this anti-abortion, if you want to make this give human life value to the child in the womb, all you have to do is go to the verse before it, right? But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. So in this passage, we have a man strikes his slave with a rod, dies, he shall be avenged, okay? This man is to be put to death for beating the slave to death, even though in the very next verse, if he survives 2 days, the slave is his money. So the slave doesn't have all the rights of a free Israelite human, but the slave has some rights as a human. You could argue the same for the child here, right? So that her children come out, but there is no harm, there shall be a fine. So this is putting some human value on the fetus in the womb, just not complete human value on the fetus in the womb. You could then argue that this is the better way of interpreting it. What he's trying to argue is that this is historically how it's been interpreted, and we've seen in the Septuagint, not the case. In Rashi, not the case. Targum Jonathan, not the case. The Vulgate, not the case. Like over and over again, this just isn't how it's been interpreted. This is a very modern interpretation by people who are Protestants who want to read their pro-life views into the Bible, their anti-abortion views into the Bible. But this passage isn't directly discussing abortion. You could argue that the new modern interpretation that he's offering is a better one if you'd like. I think the problem that you run into is that you don't get a verse. Here with the slave, you get a verse where the owner intentionally kills the slave, followed by a verse where the owner accidentally kills the slave. But then we only get a verse where the fetus is accidentally killed, and we get this line. He shall surely be fined as the woman's husband shall impose upon him. What if the husband doesn't impose a fine? What if he doesn't go to the judges? What if the husband wanted the abortion, right? Then there wouldn't be any fine. It seems pretty clear to me that even though this verse isn't talking directly about abortion, the outcome of this verse is that abortion is okay. It's acceptable under the law. If you want to make the argument that he's making, you can do that. But you got to factor it against the verse before it where the slave has value, not full value, but it has some value. And then you could build that into an interpretation here. But using the historical interpretation that he tried to use just doesn't work. I'm sorry, it doesn't get you there. But hopefully I got you there. How'd I do? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, subscribe to the channel. Whatever you do, don't just sit there. Do something.